Michael, and thanks for having us. Getting on board, delighted to be here today. Our job is to change the face of trusteeship. That's what we exist to do. So whenever we get the chance to talk to people who are potentially thinking about trustees or who are in positions to help other people become trustees, it's always an exciting feature for us. Now, I just want everybody that's watching from the attendee list to open your chat box. And then if you can, change the little blue button to say panelists and attendees, and just tell us where you are tuning in from. Where in the country are you? We want to use the chat function as we go through this webinar, and we want to use the Q&A function. So you'll have the chance to ask plenty of questions, not just of me, but also to the panelists. So it's coming in now, which is great. So you can all hear me. We've got Surrey, Southwest London for Ella, Heather in Cambridge, got Kim in Cardiff. I'm in Cardiff too. So Plynhound to you, Kim, Verity in Cornwall, Michael from Walton, Northamptonshire. We've got Sussex, Leamington Spa. Great. Okay, so the point is it's working. That's the key thing. The way that this is going to work today is I'm going to spend the first 15 minutes or so just talking you through the basics of trusteeship. So what is a trustee, who can become a trustee, and what are the myths surrounding trusteeship? Then we've got two panels for you. The first panel, which is going to run from about 10 to 5 till 5:30, is around being a trustee. We've got a number of panelists who are going to talk to you about the benefits of trusteeship. What has it done for them, and what have they been able to contribute to as a trustee? And then the second panel, which will follow immediately after that, is on charity trusteeship and the role of HR. So I suspect panelists will talk about the role of HR skills in the trustee room, but also what can you do to empower your staff and people in your organisation to become trustees too. So if at any point you do have a question, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and we'll deal with them as and when they come up. Thank you for entertaining my request with the chat there. We've got a couple of other places, Buckinghamshire, Newark, we've got Len from Yorkshire and London, 2 places. Which one are you at, Len, during lockdown? Got Farnham there as well. So I'm going to share my screen with you whilst I present the first set of slides. Hopefully you can all see that. So what is a trustee and who can become one? As I say, this is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour. It's going to be very quick because we've only got the 10-15 minutes that I mentioned. And what we're going to do is focus on what is a trustee, some examples of issues dealt with by trustees, some of the myths surrounding trusteeship, and next steps for you in terms of potentially becoming a trustee, or indeed forwarding how to become a trustee onto your staff and your colleagues. I just want you all to, using the chat function though, to answer the question at the bottom. On a sort of scale of 1 to 5, where are you when it comes to your knowledge of trusteeship? Is it you've got no knowledge, you just saw this webinar and wanted to come along, you've got some understanding and want to learn more, or you've been a trustee and this is just a refresher for you? So we've got a mixture of numbers coming in. Heather 3, Fraser 1, Chiltern CIPD, you are 2, Andrew 3, Verity 5, and you're on 3, a couple more 3s, 4s, 5. Okay, so a real mixed bag for everyone on that, somewhere in between that scale of 1 and 5. So that just helps us understand where to pitch it and to help the panelists understand where to pitch the session to. So what is a trustee then? Well, trying to define a trustee in a sentence is quite difficult, but the Charity Commission has had a pretty decent stab at it. And this is what they say, that trustees have overall control of a charity and are responsible for making sure it's doing what it is set up to do. They may be known by other titles such as directors, board members, governors, committee members. Whatever they are called, trustees are the people who lead the charity and decide how it is run. Now, normally in a session like this, I would spend quite a bit of time with you working out what leading and controlling a charity is compared to managing a charity. We don't have time for that today, but remember as you go through this webinar that trustees are the strategic leaders in charities, but the bulk of charities are quite small. So actually trustees do sometimes do additional volunteering, which I'll talk through a little bit in a moment. All trustees in the UK have to be unpaid, and most of them form parts of a committee of between 5 and 8 people. Of course, there are charities that absolutely break that and have boards that have 15, 16 trustees. There are other charities that have very small boards where they only have 2 or 3 trustees. So whilst I'm going to give you what we think is best practice, some of the facts or some of the sort of statistics that I'll be telling you are what we know as an average across the sector. Now, there are 6 key duties that the Charity Commission places on you as a trustee. And these are the 6 core duties. This is contained in a document called the Essential Trustee, which I'll share in the chat function with you now, but you will also get a copy of these slides afterwards. The Essential Trustee is a real good starting place if you're a new trustee. It contains essentially an induction into trusteeship. So the 6 duties are: 1, ensuring your charity is carrying out its purposes for the public benefit. 2, complying with your charity's governing document and the law. Though what I will say is you don't need to be a lawyer. I've been a trustee for 10 years. I first became a trustee when I was 18, and I've just turned 29, so actually it's 11 years now. I am not a lawyer, despite having a law degree. You don't actually need to be a lawyer. This is about having just a broad understanding of charity law. You need to act in your charity's best interests, which is number 3. Number 4, ensure your charity is accountable. I often get asked a question, accountable to who? Well, accountable to the regulator, so the Charity Commission, but more importantly, I would argue, accountable to the charity's staff, to the charity's funders, and to the service users of that charity. I use the word service user, other people will use the word beneficiary or clients, depending on the nature of their charity. So that's who I think you are accountable to. Number 5 is ensuring that your charity's resources are managed responsibly. Of course, the word responsibly is open to interpretation in this. And I point to the stuff around charity chief executive pay, which sometimes hits the press. Some people think that is a unresponsible way of spending charity funds. Other people think that's perfectly reasonable, but that is one of the duties the Commission places on you. And the last one, if you're sat there thinking, I'm not an expert on this, that, or the other, I don't know how or where my role fits in, the Commission only requires you to act with reasonable care and skill. So what that does is place a layer of protection around you. As long as you act with reasonable care and skill, it is unlikely that you as an individual will get into trouble with the Charity Commission. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about liability in a moment, because that is always one of the questions that comes up. As I say, if you do have any questions, please do use the Q&A button at the bottom to ask them. Now, some of the examples of issues dealt with trustee boards then, what is it trustees actually do? As a trustee, you very well might be looking at fundraising strategy for one meeting. So how to raise the money you need to operate. You might look at the services your charity offers, planning and evaluating those services. You might close down services, you might start new services, depending on the context that you're operating in. Trustees are ultimately responsible for the finances of the charity. So it's no surprise that charity financing comes into most board meetings, one way or another. That might be looking at the cash flow or the overline, the sort of top line of the budget. If you are sitting on a subcommittee in your charity, like the Risk and Finance Committee, then that would allow perhaps a deeper dive into the finances than the main boardroom will allow you. But most boards will look at finances every time they meet. You might look at safeguarding, keeping the vulnerable people you support safe. You might look at an emergency response to something that's going on, for instance, coronavirus, but that could be anything. The charity sector is so diverse in what it does, therefore the emergencies that come into the charity world are also diverse. And another thing that you are responsible for is normally recruiting the chief executive, which is quite a fun part to be a part of. And if you are HR professionals, that might be something where your skill set lend quite nicely. Now, we've listed just a couple here, but your board experience can be extremely varied. So this is not an endless list. Now, some of the practical aspects of being a trustee then, boards of trustees are typically, like I said earlier, 4 to 8 people. They tend to meet 3 to 6 times a year. There are some trustees that meet every month. There are other trustees that meet every 2 months. But broadly, most charities fit into the 3 to 6 times a year model. You should, of course, try to attend all your meetings. The board that I'm on, we meet 4 times. So if I miss a meeting, that means I miss a quarter of the meetings in that year. So in terms of making sure you're a trustee that is thriving in the boardroom, it's really important you're upfront about your time commitment and availability, and you try and attend all sessions. You might also support the charity between meetings. What do we mean by that? Well, you might work on individual projects with them. You might be asked to speak at a report launch. You might be asked to talk to a funder about something. You might be asked to sign something off in between meetings. I received an email yesterday about a piece of policy work that we're doing that is likely to hit us in some hot water with the press. So we had to make sure that trustees agreed to allow the charity to continue to do that. It is really varied. You might also have periods of time where the charity doesn't request anything else of you other than attending meetings. But it's not unusual to be at an AGM or, as I say, to be at a report launch. Of course, notwithstanding the fact that none of us are going anywhere at the moment, but in normal times. Each meeting should have an agenda and papers, and you should receive those in advance. If you don't, maybe this is where you can lend your skill sets. Lots of boards are badly run because people don't know what they're doing, especially of smaller, more local organisations where people get together to do something for their community. Sometimes the governance practice isn't what we would call best practice, but there is absolutely scope for manoeuvre and for contribution from you there. Minutes should record what was decided at the meeting, and every trustee's opinion has equal weight. It doesn't matter whether the trustee is a treasurer, a chair, a deputy chair, doesn't matter. All trustees have equal weight. It just means that the chair is first among equals. They tend to facilitate the conversation, and more often than not, will have a deciding vote. Now, like I said earlier, I've been a trustee for 10 years and we've never voted on anything. Most boards operate on a consensus basis. There are occasions where some formalities require us to vote, things like we need trustees to approve the appointment of a trustee. Do you agree? And it's quite literally nods on screen rather than hands up voting. So that's worth remembering, that most boards, you won't be in a tricky position often where you're sort of adversarially voting against each other or not. Now, what is the trustee landscape then? Well, the 168,000 refers to the number of charities in England and Wales. And at this point, it's worth saying that 75% of charities have an income of less than £100,000. So just to reiterate that, about 75% of charities have an income of less than £100,000. So the likelihood is you're going to be working, if you or your staff become trustees, in a small, local, specialised charity. Some charities are not growing, and that's on purpose. For instance, if you have a local park and there is a group of volunteers set up for your local park, like in Cardiff, the Friends of Bute Park, which is our local park in the city centre, that park is probably never going to grow. Yes, visitor numbers might grow, but broadly, what it's aiming to do remains the same. It's to look after the park. It doesn't want to take over other parks. It doesn't want to run a park in Newport. It is designed to focus on that organisation. So if you think about things in the arts and culture sector, that's the same. Museums might have more guests, but they tend to stick to what they're doing, the core of their business. So small doesn't necessarily mean bad or underdeveloped or any of that. It can sometimes just mean focused, steady growth, or it is just wanting to stay where it is. Now, most people would have used a charity service in the last year without realising it. 90% of UK households have used a charitable service in the last 12 months. And that can be pretty broad. Searching online for help with my landlord, sometimes the first thing that comes up is Citizens Advice. You go on Citizens Advice, that is a charity. Or Dyson Hoover reviews, you go on to which, as we know, is a consumer charity. So most people access charitable services every year, 90% of UK households. Now, the 950,000 bit is how many trustees there are. So there's 950,000 trustees out there, which means if you do become a trustee, you're joining an army of 1 million volunteers, essentially, that keep charities going. Every charity has to have a board of trustees, so you're not in the minority. Yes, Michael, thanks. I've noticed it's 16:50. I'm just going to go through a couple more slides before I hand over. That's because we started just slightly later, so just bear with me on that. The 2000 bit is the number of trustees appointed on average every week. And the 90,000 is how many vacancies there are at any one time. So if you and your staff are looking to become a trustee, there's loads of opportunity out there to fill it up. Now, I was going to go through some of the charity myths, but what I will do is share these slides with you afterwards, just so you can flick through them at your own pace. I hopefully have already dispelled some of the myths that you might have had. This is just to help you get your head around it. The key thing I would say, though, if you are supporting staff, is that this myth is quite common, that you will join the board of a big charity. It's likely you'll join one of these, a local organisation. You might join an organisation that's federated, like Mind. Mind, Lambeth and Southwark belongs to the national network of Minds, despite being a local focused charity. So just bear that in mind when you're supporting people or indeed looking for trusteeship yourself. The largest 15 charities by income are on this screen for you, include universities. You've got Nuffield Health there, which not everyone knows is a charity. So like I say, the charity sector is very diverse. One of the things that I wanted to tell you as well is the average amount of time people spend a year on being a trustee. We think, or well, we know actually, the research shows us on average it's 30 hours a year. Obviously, that fluctuates according to whatever your charity is going through and the context it's operating in. So during the last year, most of us have spent a bit more time on our boards than we would have normally, because obviously we've been helping guide the charity through COVID. And I say guide insofar as that none of us have ever lived through this before. So that can change, but that's the sort of level of commitment, an average level of commitment that we're looking for. Some charities are double that. Whenever you or your staff are going through an appointments process, it's always worth asking this question: how much time do you need from us a year? The last thing I wanted to do is just focus on this bit here, which is how we can help you as individuals become trustees, or the staff that you work with to become trustees. You can connect with us to look at our vacancy list. So you can connect with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or our newsletter. And again, I'll send these slides around after with all these links in. We have a free guide available for you, which I'll copy that into the panel chat as well. You can register for that, and it's sort of hot off the press. We only published it in November, so you can go and have a look, and that gives you things like cover letter templates, etc. You can join our charity board leadership program, which is an intense program run over 6 weeks with 6 months of additional one-to-one support. But I'll let you read about that when I circulate that afterwards too. And if you wish to, you can commission in-house workshops for your staff. Now, I'm going to pause it there. As I said, it was always going to be a whistle stop. Hopefully that has taught you something about trusteeship that you didn't know before. And what we are now going to do is move into our panels to bring it to life a little bit, rather than me just talking to you non-stop. So if I could ask Jeremy, Angela, Ellie, Dee, and Melanie to come off of blank videos, turn your video on. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves just very quickly, one line about them. And then the first thing that I would like them to do is answer the question: if you had to choose one career benefit of trusteeship, what would it be? And that's just to give us a starter for 10. So Jeremy, over to you.
Thanks, Leon. I'm Jeremy Leadsom. I'm a non-exec director and a charity trustee. I left full-time education just over a year ago, full-time employment, to follow a more plural career. I'm a trustee at Sussex Prisoners Families based in Brighton. Interestingly, I did attend the Getting on Board charity leadership course, which I find really, really useful. I suppose my overall career benefit of being a trustee, I would say, is find something that you're really interested in where you can make a difference by making a contribution. And in a way, it's rather selfish, because if you do that, I think you'll find it personally immensely satisfying. And actually, especially at the moment, feeling good about what you do, I think is very, very empowering.
Thanks, Jeremy. That was great. And Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela Russell. I work for a company called Now You, which is a small charity, but I'm also a trustee at another charity where I also headed the HR before I became a trustee. So I'm also the secretary there. And I would say the benefits that I've got from that is acting in a non-executive role. I started off being very hands-on and operational, but now it's more executive level and looking at the strategic kind of overview and working with other professionals in different functions in finance and other areas as well. And I would say that's given me the kind of knowledge that I didn't have before operating at that level. So not only am I giving back and I'm working for a company that I'm really interested in what they do, it's in children's education. So the charity is based very small, very local in South London, very new. So it's only 2 years old. So this is why I've had a kind of multiple role there. But now that we're getting slightly more established, I've now moved into that kind of trustee role. And yeah, it's just given me loads of benefits of just understanding how to operate at that level. So it's been a huge learning curve, but also a really good one.
Thanks, Angela. And we will ask you what learning curve you've been on in a moment. It's a good question. So Ellie, over to you.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I am a trustee of Quakers in Britain and a voluntary director for the Quiet Company. And I think the thing that I sort of learned most has been and benefit my career has been around sort of engagement with leadership and finance, which I'm at the beginning of my career. I'm a civil servant in, I guess, my real life. I just because of where I am in like the massive hierarchy that is the civil service, I get access to sort of, and I get to observe more finance and leadership spaces in my role as a trustee and a director than I think I probably get in my day job at the moment, which hopefully will set me up for the future.
Thanks, Ellie. And Dee.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Dee. I kind of identify as a recovering HR director. I've now moved into the field of diversity and inclusion and founded my own business. But I actually did trusteeships quite early on in my HR career. And I started off with a small one, as you mentioned earlier, Leon, and then joined Amnesty. So started to make a move into slightly more kind of bigger charities. And I've recently, and then currently still am, a trustee for a charity called Sour Lemons, which looks at underrepresentation in the creative industries. And that's been a really interesting journey because it's almost been like a startup. A lot of the skills that I've learned from my tech background have been really useful in looking at an organization that's very small, received a lot of income and is growing into a new organization. The things that I've loved about it is, aside from what I think Jeremy just said around the kind of altruistic sense, like it's great to kind of give your time to something you believe in, you feel good, and there's no doubt about it. Certainly, if I think back to how my HR career developed, it gave me the opportunity to be exposed to, I suppose, kind of executive thinking, as Angela was saying, strategic planning, business development, thinking about subjects that typically weren't in the domain of HR, but you recognise how crucial they are and how HR can actively play a role. So it's been great.
Thanks, Dee. And Melanie.
Hi, I'm Melanie Griffiths. I have spent the last 15 years at JP Morgan in wealth management. I paused my career at the beginning of lockdown to look after my 3 young children. I'm starting a new position of week's time. I am a trustee and director, better known as Which. In terms of what trusteeship has brought me, I would say diversity of experience. So I was with my previous employer 15 years, and I was a little bit concerned that I would be viewed as a one-trick pony. And it was for me the opportunity to show that I could adapt to different environments. So it's diversity in terms of your exposure to different people, different thoughts, different culture. Equally, I know people who have held position for a short amount of time, maybe just a few months, something's gone wrong. And I think if you've got trustee where you've been there for 4 or 5 years, it's so much more credible when you say, well, something happened, but actually, yes, I do have loyalty. Yes, I am committed. So it provides a bit of a safety net as well. I must admit, going from a full-time, quite sort of career-minded into looking after my 3 young children was in a lockdown environment was very difficult. I found it very challenging, and I was so grateful to have the trustee role to engage my brain outside of Peppa Pig. And it's interesting to also just have a connection to the world and to the working place. So I was a little bit concerned about not being in the workplace at a time when the ways of working were changing. But thanks to my role as a trustee, I was used to remote working, etc. Which, you know, it really provided me with a safety net. And in the end, despite the environment, I had 5 job offers, and I'm sure my role as a trustee really helped.
Great. Well, where to start? I think it would be really interesting to learn, if we take this conversation down 2 paths, and the first path would be kind of what you've gotten out of trusteeship, and then the second is what you've sort of contributed to it. So what would be really helpful is to understand what skills has your charity called upon in the last year whilst you've been a trustee. And I see Angela nodding, so I'm going to go to Angela first, because that's the only way I can tell if anyone's ready to answer or not. So Angela, what skills has your charity pulled on from you in the last year?
I would say it's definitely policies, governance side of things. It's a whole new industry for me. I mean, I've worked for private companies. I worked for a charity a long time ago. So working for a charity and working in that kind of industry, the policies and the governance is obviously a very important part of it. That obviously helps a charity to run and to be run correctly. So that was a skill that I was called upon to do first. Get the safeguarding in place, and also all the other policies we needed, the volunteer agreements and all the other things we needed to get that kind of, the whole governance thing going. So that was my main thing that I brought to the organisation, was getting the policies done, because I love a good policy anyway. I basically got all of those in place. We had nothing before. As I said, we were only 2 years old, so we had nothing. So when it started, it was a little bit chaotic. But now that we're 2 years on, we've got a lot of things in place. And when we onboard people, we've got all the right documents now, and the safeguarding is in place. And so we're in a much better place than we were 2 years ago.
Thanks, Angela. That's great. Let's go to Dee for that same question, which, just to remind you, is what skills has your charity called upon from you in the last year or so?
So I'd say that the response to the pandemic, I'm not sure if we're allowed to say that word, it has definitely had an impact. From one respect, from an organisational design and development perspective, we moved, in terms of the programmes that we deliver through this charity for young people, to an online space, which brought about lots of different challenges around safeguarding, efficiency of delivery, mental health support, a range of different things that had to be thought through, which, to be frank, I hadn't really thought about before, as well as thinking about our core staff team and actually what was the right thing to do, what was the model that we would use, and what would resourcing look like. And actually, through that period, it's led to us reevaluating the organisation strategy before we commence another financial year. So starting from what felt like quite an immediate response to coronavirus and making sure that we could sustain ourselves and survive, we've reached a place where we can thrive, and it's actually led to a very different way of working, and also kind of pivoting into slightly different programmes and different streams of work, which I kind of do think is a HR thing. I think we should absolutely be involved in those conversations. So that's been really rich. It was unexpected, but it's also been really positive.
Great. And Jeremy, same question to you, please, and then we'll move on.
I suppose a quick bit of context. I approached the Sussex Prisons families because I thought I could help with income generation, particularly trying to approach local corporates on a kind of CSR perspective. Interesting enough, it's rather evolved, because in that time period, we've decided to convert from a KIC to a charity, a community interest company, on the belief that we believe we're well funded at the moment. We really are well supported, but we need to be thinking 5-6 years out. So we're now in the process of converting from a KIC to a charity. And that's actually sort of lent on, I suppose, governance and planning and policy skills, or my experience in the past. And so what's really happened, I think most of, bearing in mind I became a trustee almost just as lockdown started, I've only actually ever had one apart from an initial round of interviews and some getting to know the team and what we did on the ground, most of my experience has been as we are now. But now we're literally starting a set of work streams to work out exactly what we need to do and when to become a charity. And we're kicking off one of the work streams tomorrow, actually, because we need to recruit an additional 3 trustees. So there's a small advert there. So I wouldn't say it's lent on one particular skill, but I would say broadly, the skills I've found most useful to date are probably my existing board skills I've lent on, and being an effective member of a board.
Thanks, Jeremy. And we like cheeky plugs. So if you want to share a link to your advert or an email address, whatever, in the chat room, absolutely feel free to. There's a question that's come in from the attendees, and it's Heather's question. I'm going to come to Ellie for the answer first. And the question is, are there any rules or guidance about governance that should be read before taking up a trustee role? Ellie?
I mean, my first thing is, don't panic about it. Don't feel that you need to go in knowing everything. Like, people will induct you to these things. There will be nuggets that you learn in the role. So I think there are useful documents to read. I think there are generic documents like the Essential Trustee, which Leon spoke about, and actually having a understanding of what happens outside your charity before you walk into your charity can actually be one of the most useful things, because it allows you to come in with the fresh pair of eyes that you are, and understanding what practice across the sector might look like and speaking to people. But I think if you want things specifically around your charity, and I will completely acknowledge at this point, I'm a governance nerd. So, and Liam probably knows that about me, but like, constitutions, if that helps, if that is something you like seeing stuff and you like to see how the structure of it works on paper, see if you've got a constitution, ask what your like governing documents are. And the other thing I think about is like where they cite out to other documents. So if they cite out to a handbook, be like, I don't necessarily need to read that because I'm not 100%, I need to know it's there. That's your due diligence. You need to know that's there. And the other 2 things I'd say, which aren't strictly governance documents, but will help you engage, are if you have a governance structure that looks more complicated than just trustees, understand how other committees and subcommittees fit into that. And then the last thing is, I'd ask somebody, probably someone in your comms or your stakeholder team, what your stakeholder dependencies look like, because they will inform your governance more than you think they will, even if they're not explicitly written down, because your minutes will be written in the awareness that they get sent to stakeholders, or they're your ultimate beneficiaries. And so understanding what they look like, although not explicitly a governance document, will directly impact your understanding of your own governance.
Thanks, Ellie. And Mel, same question to you. So it's any rules or guidance about governance that should be read before taking up a trustee role? And if you don't know any of the sort of, like the Essential Trustee or whatever, what do you wish you had sort of known before you would join the board, I guess, is another spin on that question. So what pre-reading should you do before you take up a trusteeship? Sorry, Mel, you're muted.
Apologies. To echo what was said previously, I think the Charities Commission has some excellent guidance, and you can literally pages or a 2-page summary. So in terms of your responsibilities, I would start with that. Then, I mean, there are books you can read, just stick to something quite short. But I think before you interview with the charity and decide whether you want to be involved at all, because it comes with a lot of responsibilities, you really should read, as previously mentioned, their articles or whatever the equivalent document is, because ultimately you're there to hold the charity to account and to make sure that you stick to what you state your mission is. So you need to really understand what is your mission. Then most charities will publish some sort of annual report. I definitely would read that if the minutes are available. I mean, now everything is online, so I would try to get to know as much what is on the charity's website. I would also, if possible, try to speak to some of the stakeholders. So if it's university, speak to some of the students. If it's a school, speak to some of the parents. I think those are sort of general, but maybe also check what's in the press so that you don't just land on the charity's website, but what have other people said? Is there anything controversial that you should be aware of?
Thank you. Angela, anything you want to add there from a sort of a more startup perspective? Is there anything that you would wish you had read before joining the board of a startup, essentially?
I think speaking to the other trustees would have been really useful as well, just to get their perspective on how the charity's been run, how many times they meet, how the meetings are set up, what information is available. Also, their kind of impact, really, just find out about the impact of the organisation, who the beneficiaries are, and as was said before as well, is speaking to them maybe. So I think all of that, because I started as a trustee for the very first time in a very small company that wasn't set up in the way that a traditional kind of trusteeship would have been set up, I think there was a lot of missing information that I had to learn and then develop along the way. I'm not saying I regret that, because in a lot of ways it was a learning curve for me, and it actually helped me to understand how to set things up from the very beginning. So now I think I have a really good idea of how to become a trustee, set it up, get all the documents in place, have things and everything else. So I think it was basically just, I wish I'd spoken to more people before I joined, but in actual fact, it helped me to learn really quickly when I joined.
Thank you. We've had another question that's come through, and someone has already mentioned technology, and I think it was Dee. So Dee, I'm going to come to you to answer this first. If my memory served me wrong, then apologies. But the question comes from Anne, and it is, how much focus have the panel had to place on developing technology/digital strategies given lockdown? So Dee, over to you.
I did say technology, so it's definitely not unfair. I would say, I think even prior to lockdown, if I'm being honest, if I think of the types of conversations I was having in my previous trusteeships, I think the technological impact on the charity sector can't be underestimated from all of its operations, both internal and external. So it hasn't felt like a new conversation, but I think the pandemic accelerated and actually forced our hands to make certain changes that we had thought we'd do in maybe a year or 18 months time. So I would say that's the emphasis that I've seen. Things we talked about have been accelerated as opposed to new things emerging. Definitely new challenges in applying a technological or digital approach to things such as fundraising or to program delivery. But those were kind of like on the spot. I would say that's kind of been my experience. I don't know if that's answered the question.
No, it has. And actually, I wish I'd bought shares in Zoom last year. Crikey, I would have been retiring by now. But if I could bring in it, just to add a different angle to it, Jeremy, if I can bring you in, because you said you other than the recruitment process, you've not had any face-to-face interaction with the rest of your board. Can you talk to us a little bit about how prepared your board was for having to onboard you through tech only and running its meetings and ensuring good governance practice whilst on Zoom? Can you put a bit of meat on the bones for us there?
Yeah, a little bit. I think so. I joined before lockdown, and I met all the founders of the charity. I met all the key ingredients once, as it were. So I went to visit the work we did in the courts, the work we do in prisons. I didn't get involved in any of the work we did in the community, but was acquainted with it. And then clearly all our board meetings then have been online. And I don't think that has happened fairly normally. Yes, like many others, we had the debate whether it's Zoom, Teams, or this, that, and the other, and we tried various formats, and we'll probably continue to do so. But just going back to the question, I mean, the interesting thing was to see how we reacted to delivering our services in a lockdown environment. Bearing in mind, initially the courts weren't operating, the prisons effectively locked down as well. So we were really left with, at that stage, well, how can we continue to operate effectively in the community? And that we did need to change quite a bit, because we weren't really using technology to deal with our clients. And I think we've made great progress there, and quick progress. So I think if the question was asking how we adapted by use of technology, I think we've been pretty good at that.
Thank you. And Melanie, if I can bring you in, because obviously Which is a brand that most people know and many people have used, as I said with my example about which Dyson Hoover to buy. But what has been the approach from a really well-established and quite wealthy charity when it comes to focusing on tech and digital during lockdown? Has it been a complete pivot for you guys, or were you already sort of prepared for it?
I mean, we normally attended meetings in person, so it was a change, but you know, they have tech specialists. It was up and running very quickly. As you can imagine, we were at an advantage. I mean, there's a lot of technology to produce what we do. They've got a website, so you had all the tech support. It was super smooth. Now, one of the challenges, it's quite a large board compared to smaller charities. I mean, when there's a joint meeting, it can be up to 30 people, and it's how do you really, you know, keep the momentum going and everyone talking when you have such a large board. And in addition, you know, there's a number of reasons why people become trustees, but the social aspect is, or you know, those conversation that might happen afterwards, some informal feedback, and how do you find a way to ensure that those conversation is still are still happening. But you know, with a larger charity, it was fairly smooth. And I have to say that now that I'm going back into working, I'm hoping that some of it will stay, because it is a time commitment, and if you do it, I think you need to do it well, and you need to read all the papers, and you really need to dedicate the time the charity deserves. It's quite a challenge if you have to take half a day of work every time you need to attend. So the fact that probably going forward it will be a mixture of the two, with maybe some more socializing in the evening in person and some of the meetings during the day more remotely, is helpful if you're still in sort of full-time employment.
And that pivots quite nicely, not only into the second panel, which we're 50 minutes ahead of time, so we've still got loads of time to flesh this out, but I guess people on this call will be interested to know, what things can your employer, the people that pay you, do to enable you to be a trustee? Can you put some flesh on that, Melanie? And I think you were sort of heading there with your answer just then around what is it as an employer you can do to allow your staff to go off and be a trustee?
So, I mean, I alluded to it, that the new employer I'm joining has a super flexible policy, so that it's not a problem at all. But I guess it's a bit like having children some time ago, where you felt really guilty if you took, you know, a morning off to attend something with your child, to sort of have an understanding that people are greater than just their professional life, and provide that flexibility rather than them sort of having to sneak it in, or and a real understanding that actually your employee is acquiring skills. I mean, I remember I put my hands up early on in my career to be a manager of the analyst that joined us. And there was an interview process, and I was told, well, we really liked what you had to say at interview, but you've never managed people. And I thought, well, it's a bit of a vicious circle if you won't let me manage people because I've never managed people. And actually, when you're a trustee, you have a great opportunity to learn new skills that you may not be learning in your organization. So you could almost view it as part of free training. And therefore, you have to view it in that light, I think, because you're acquiring tremendous skills, which you are bringing into your organization.
Thank you. Dee, anything you want to add there? Because I note your background is in HR, so anything that you would want to add about creating a culture where staff can go and be trustees?
Yeah, I think there's you know, adding to kind of what Melanie said, I think some of the kind of benefits I've seen in some of the more tech-based companies is like paid volunteering days off. Like, I know that sounds like a really small thing, but it's actively saying we encourage you to go and volunteer, whatever that may look like. And some of them have, like, you know, links to charity partnerships. Others are things that you can take and use yourself. But I think that in and of itself is quite a strong signal. When I worked at the BBC, there was definitely a desire to do community development. And therefore, as employees of the BBC, if you were interested in any form of a charity role, be that volunteering or a trusteeship, there were internal kind of, I suppose, learning and development type courses. Or things to think about in terms of matching people to community-based causes, which was a really interesting approach in thinking about how proactive an employer can be if they really want to follow through on corporate social responsibility. So those are some of the things that I've kind of valued in my career.
Thank you. And there's another question here from Heather, and Angela, heads up, you're going to get this one first. It's, as an HR professional, I would like to ensure I contribute beyond HR. How do you manage to contribute on wider issues, developing strategy and getting under the skin of finances? And just to kick us off, Heather, every trustee who comes with a professional background often often is pigeonholed into only talking about those things. So, and I feel really sorry for treasurers and finance people, because they find it really difficult to talk about anything but the numbers. They'd love to really get under the skin of some of the things, but board culture sometimes doesn't allow that, because if you are a finance professional, you only know about the hardcore finance stuff and not about the charitable services that you're delivering. So it doesn't matter what professional background you've got, that does sometimes slip in. So the question here is, what is strategy, and how do you develop on things beyond your core skill set, and how do you contribute to that? Angela?
Well, I would say that because the charity I work for is very small, the scope to get involved in other functions has been great. So I've been involved in the finance function, the IT function. I've looked at the strategy for all of those areas, because the charity is also a children's education charity. We had to go online pretty quickly because we used to teach in person. So it's all technical kind of education that we do. So I had to oversee the risk assessment, something which I hadn't quite done before, so that's in that area at all. But we weren't really pigeonholed because we didn't have all the skills on the board to be able to do that, because we're so small. There's only 3 trustees. So I don't know what it's like in a bigger organisation, but I would say for a small one, you get to use not only your skills, but you get to learn others, work with other people who are specialists, learn how they do things and have that input, because you all have to work together on the board, agree the strategy. So I would say for me personally, I was able to do a lot more than I had done in most of my HR career when it comes to learning about other functions.
Thank you. Ellie?
So I think I got a bit of a free pass in this one because nobody really understood what I did before. I worked in academic publishing on like quite complex medical journals, like bioinformatics, which when you speak to someone, they're like, what does that mean? Which meant that I got a bit of a really nice situation where people didn't know quite how to pigeonhole me, but they thought I might have a skill. And so I got to sort of decide what I wanted to do. But I would say, and I'm not reflecting necessarily on my own experience, but I'll pull in my mum's experience. My mum's a trustee and she's a lawyer, and she used to get recruited. She used to get asked whether she would do lots of legal things, and actually she used to say she didn't want to. She said she would happily advise when the scenario came out, but actually that wasn't the only reason she wanted to be on a board. And I think actually having those conversations and being transparent about that is totally fine. I think it is ultimately a voluntary opportunity, and the balance of like what you put in versus what you get out has to be right for you. And think about that. It is reciprocal. But you will find that you will have a natural affinity for certain interests and run with them. And people will also ask you to do jobs and you'll be like, why me? And see and speak to people, ask why they thought you'd be good for it. I think that would be my biggest advice on that.
Thanks, Ellie. And Mel, Jeremy, are either of you two on a subcommittee as well as being on your main boards? Yeah. Mel, could you talk about how subcommittee, like what subcommittees are and how they work, and how that allows you to get under the skin of a particular subject area? Because I think that's always quite a nice tip to give potential new trustees, which is, join a subcommittee, because one, it allows you to show your skills off, and two, it allows you to get under the skin of a particular issue. Can you just talk to us about your subcommittee experience, please?
Sure. So I'm on the investment committee, which from my professional background was quite a natural fit, and as well as having an investment pot, which has a pension fund as well. So quite naturally, a lot of financial issues come up. But in addition to that, I feel really passionate about sustainability. And when we started leading more on sustainability, I put my hands up and I said, can I please be in the sustainability working group? So exactly as was previously said, it's a balance between what interests you and what useful skills you have to bring to the table. I mean, you go into a lot more depths on the subcommittee, and it can be a little bit complicated sometimes to understand, okay, when do you bring it back to the board? What is the oversight on the subcommittee? But I would turn it around on its head slightly and say that even though you have finance people and you have lawyers, particularly in the larger charity, you are collectively accountable for every decision made, including signing off the accounts, and you cannot delegate that responsibility away. Sure, sometimes we have fairly complex discussion on tech where I don't understand everything, but I want to make sure I always understand enough that I can have that common sense approach, and everyone brings common sense to the table. And I think you have to be really careful when you delegate away to the finance guy, the legal guy, because, or woman, whatever, because if you look at all the great failures in the corporate world, it's often on the assumption that somebody else was looking at this. So I think it's very important to remember that collectively you are all accountable for everything, even though you've got an accountant, etc. But in terms of the subcommittee, I mean, there are a number of things. It goes from quite a specialized, such as investment, to the remuneration committee, which, you know, you don't necessarily need to have particular HR skills. It's helpful, but again, it's a lot of common sense, but you have an opportunity to dig a lot deeper.
Great, thank you. Jeremy, anything to add there?
Not a lot. I just think, just going back to Heather's question, I don't think she is necessary, but I wouldn't be intimidated. I think we all, I mean, I have a sales and marketing background. I've got guys from a sort of, I'm just thinking the other trustees, finance, tech, consultancy. We've all got a range of skills. None of us are particular kingpins and everything, so we're very dependent on each other. I would say we all want to develop a great ability to ask sensible questions. If you don't understand something, ask a question. If it's not articulated well enough, make sure it is. Just going back, we have 3 committees, and committees are subsets of the board. They're obviously set up, they're empowered by the board and report back to the board. So it's the same responsibilities, and I sit on our fundraising committee.
Okay, and thinking about, just to tell how many.
Sorry, I have one other question actually. One other thing. Heather's question talks about developing strategy. Well, one of the core responsibilities of a trustee is to make sure that their trustee remains on message, remains truthful to their strategy. So it's absolutely a key requisite for any trustee is that they are very much there helping to formulate and review strategy. It's the critical thing.
Thank you. And just before I throw in a tuppence here, this is the 3-minute warning to just ask attendees, if you've got a question, get it in now, otherwise it's not going to get answered. But Heather asked earlier about charity governance reading, and I'm just popping in the chat, Heather, the charity governance code, which is designed to help trustees to ensure brilliant governance. So have a look at that as one. And the other point that I would make under your question is that the boardroom is also a really good classroom. I mean, I joined my first board at 18. The organisation turned over about £55 million. You might question, like, what the hell was he doing on that? But actually, I learned loads in that boardroom, despite offering a very particular skill set that the charity was after. So, and that absolutely has made me a better employee in my day job. I write better reports, or at least I think I do. Anyway, I write better reports. I feel like I'm better at understanding what my board, and I work for a charity, want from me and my team. And I feel like my performance is much higher than it would be had I not had exposure to being a trustee. Now, there are no final questions that have come through. So my final question, I'm going to come to all of you on this, is if you were to talk, if you were, well, you are, what is the one top tip you would give to the attendees of this who want to become a trustee or help other people become trustees? What's the one thing you would say? Ellie looks like she's thinking, so I'm not going to go to her first. So does Dee. Melanie looks ready to answer. So let's go with Melanie.
So I really regret not starting this earlier in my career. I had been approached before to join some clients' sort of charity boards, but I didn't have, I had a family life, I had lots of going on, and I felt I didn't have the time to dedicate to it. And I think, you know, it's only going to help you in your career and in your personal life in terms of what it brings you. If you dedicate the time to it, then it deserves. So I would advise anyone to start early on in their career before all of life's commitment fall on you, because it does take some time to get familiar with everything, and it's better to do it when you're not trying to juggle with your children, your next promotion, and I wish I had started earlier when my life generally wasn't as busy, and I would really recommend any young person gets involved. And then, you know, as you can get involved with bigger charity as time evolves, but just get started.
Thank you. And let's go to Jeremy next, because unmuted.
I'd agree with Mel. I mean, I think start earlier. I mean, I'm what am I, 61, and I started just over 12 months ago. I really wish I'd started a lot longer ago. The other one I would do is if you are wishing to go down this route, is find something you're passionate about, you know, that you're really passionate about, not just something, oh, I might be interested in that. No, find something you're really passionate about.
Thank you. And Angela?
For me personally, I would say that, I mean, I'm in my 50s, and so before this, I wasn't ready to be a trustee. So I suppose it depends on how ready you feel. Now, for me, I would say take a really good look at the charity, decide how much time, as they say, you want to give, but also if it's new, you may be just throwing yourself in there and learning as you go along. It might be a bit chaotic. If you're prepared for that, that's great. Or if you want to go for a more established charity where you can see they've got all their documents in place, you're going to learn straight away. You're going to get support, you're going to get mentoring, you know, all of that is a bonus too. So I would say that for me, my next step would be go to a bigger charity, because I'd want to be something more established. But I've actually enjoyed also being part of a smaller charity where we've just all got on with it and tried our best to make it work, and learning things really, really quickly.
Thanks, Angela. Ellie?
Yeah, so I think my biggest thing would be think about what you want from the experience, a bit like how I spoke about the reciprocal relationship that you hold with any volunteering opportunity. The difference between having local or national, the difference between having a service-led charity who deliver or have like have a fund so that they're offering across multiple schemes, but your accountability to those systems and your analysis of impact on those is different, or whether you want new or established, like Angela talked about. All of those you will learn something from all of those situations. It doesn't matter ultimately which one you pick, but think about what you want, particularly if you're thinking about it in terms of like your personal development, and just be a bit strategic about it. I think obviously echoing what Leon said right at the beginning, which is people do think they're going to end up on like the big named charities right from the beginning. That is not the reality. You can sit on small national bodies though, and think about those things and what you want to gain. That would be my biggest thing.
Thanks, Ellie. Dee, last 30 seconds to you.
I would just say that what I found really useful was talking to other trustees before I actually made applications, or if I was in the process of applying for roles. I think just trying to think about how I could translate my experience, talking through what the day-to-day kind of requirements might be for that role, a bit of myth busting, just to kind of make me not think it was some mystical role, but actually it requires a lot of pragmatism and common sense, which has been referred to. I think that's what I'd encourage people to do.
Great, and that is a wrap on panel one. Thank you very much to Melanie, Ellie, Dee, Jeremy and Angela for spending the last 40 minutes or so with us and sharing their experiences. It was great to hear from all of you, complete range of experiences, skills, backgrounds, contexts that you're operating in. So thank you very much for joining us. You're getting some love in the comments as well, so thank you. Please feel free to drop off. If you want to stay for this second panel, then please do. And at this point, if I can ask Robert, who's already done it, brilliant, Kim and Louise to unmute and come on to their videos, that would be great. Oh, we look like pros. That was as smooth as we could do it. That was great. And this second panel will run for the next 20 minutes or so. And I've asked, like I did with the last group, for these panelists to come ready to answer the question, which is, can you give us one really useful tip of how an organisation can support its staff to become trustees? So Kim, to you first, please.
Hello, I'm Kim Tester. I'm currently the head of human resources at the Office of the Secretary of State for Wales. So I'm a civil servant. I've been a volunteer since I was aged 12, and like Jeremy, I am about to be 60. And I had decided that I wanted to pursue non-executive director roles post-retirement. That's when I met Getting On Board, and I don't know why I'd never thought of it before, or why it hadn't occurred to me that charities needed trustees, and I decided to change tack. So I'm now a trustee since I'm doing the leadership development program with Getting On Board. I'm now a trustee at Refugee Ed, which helps to provide education to refugees and children in Greece. And I've also become a trustee and company director of my church, Danes Court Christian Fellowship. And a bit like Dee was saying, before I got on to Getting On Board, I'd already applied to be a trustee to Amnesty International. I went for the top. And to be fair to Penny, who's would normally have been chairing this, she told me that she didn't think that I would get it. I didn't get it, but what I did get was a feedback session with the General Secretary. And as a result, I've now become an Amnesty International speaker. And similarly, I've got an extra role with Ministry of Justice as lay advisor to the South Wales MAPA. So I feel as if this journey's been an amazing one. In terms of a useful tip, I would say I've always been committed and encouraged my organisations to support volunteering, and, you know, in a sense, led by example. We're very fortunate in the civil service that we've all got access to paid special leave for volunteering, usually about 5 days a year across the board. But I would go a step further, and I have already done this, in that I would encourage organisations to actually fund people to give them the confidence to become trustees, like the programme that Getting On Board offer. Because even though I've got a pretty broad governance experience, at age 35, I was managing a non-delinquents for that organisation, and I was managing a £100 million budget at the time. I still think when it's something new, that for a lot of people, it gives added confidence if you can actually go on some training. And so I think organisations should recognise the corporate social responsibility, and they should fund the training, just as my organisation did for me.
Thanks, Kim. And the training that Kim is talking about is the Charity Board Leadership Programme, which I shared the link for earlier, the intensive course that we run. Applications for that close tomorrow. So if you are interested or have colleagues that are interested, do tell them to check it out on our website. And I'm sure if you were to get in touch with us, we would be able to extend the deadline by a day or two if you want that to happen. Robert, over to you. So if you can give us your one-line introduction and the useful tip for an organisation to support its staff to become trustees, that would be brilliant.
Brilliant. So hi, I'm Rob Hicks. I'm the Group HR Director for Reward Gateway. And my top tip would be to make volunteering and trusteeship an everyday part of your management development program, and getting people to be thinking about careers inside and outside the business, and not be making people choose, but making this an everyday part of what they do as part of their overall career development program.
Thank you. And Louise.
So hi everybody. So Louise Montgomery, and I'm the learning partner that looks after all the technology and operations people in Bank of America. And I have to say it's been hugely interesting listening to everyone's comments around the skills you get out of being a trustee, and then both Kim and Robert, your comments there around having organisations actually invest in a programme, which is exactly what we've done. So I used to work for RBS, where we had a programme that was all about sort of supporting and developing people using being a trustee on a charity board. When I came to Bank of America, a big chunk of my role is about supporting our senior leaders. We do a lot of succession planning, and I think a lot of organisations are guilty of doing lots of sort of succession plans, but actually thinking about how you can creatively develop people with some really great skills behind that. So we've set up a a board placement program where we have a really structured approach to it. And this is about starting with the SLT, the senior leadership team, sharing with them the skills you can get from a program like this, putting the funding behind it, doing the training, and actually having a really structured approach so that people are able to go through that sort of matching service, so that they do. I think Jeremy mentioned about the skills you get are sort of board skills, which are great, and actually choosing a charity that you care about, that you have a passion for. I think that's part of the bit that we really like about this approach. It is something people are really passionate about. They get some great skills from it, but it's really well orchestrated, or at least I like to think it is.
Thanks, Louise. And actually, this is quite nice, because if we can combine the sort of next question with what the previous panel was saying around having a supportive employer, could you just run us through some of the things you do to support your staff to go on to become trustees once they've sort of landed the position, if there is anything? And this is, you know, completely open books, whatever. Just whether you offer things like what Melanie was talking about around paid, Dee was talking about around paid volunteering leave. Do you offer volunteering leave days and things like that? Louise, if you could answer first, just because your mute is off.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. So absolutely, at an organisational level, we are hugely encouraging of people sort of doing, taking the 5 days. We monitor as an organisation. I think most large corporates now do that. So it is absolutely supported from that perspective. But I think the other thing for us is actually having engagement from top down in the programme is essential here. So I speak with the chap who is head of all things technology and operations. He's going through the process himself, so he's actually put his hand up and said, I would like to take up the opportunity. And I think if you can get people in the senior team, so we've now had 4 people from our senior leadership team who've all put their hands up to say we want to do this. Next week we roll out. So we had some learnings from the first wave, which was the very senior team. And now we have an extended senior leadership team, and we're putting them through the training next week, about 60 people going through the training. So I think that endorsement and role modelling from the top really helps. That conversation that says we want to support this, we are, and I think from an organisation perspective, it speaks volumes about the organisation if they're prepared to be supportive.
That's great. Thanks, Louise. Robert, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks. For me, I think the one thing that I've always found really helpful in all of the businesses where I've done volunteering or trusteeship is all of those businesses have a real emphasis on flexible working. So rather than asking people to choose time to give up or to sacrifice, it's about trusting them to really just plan their day and their diary and their week and their month, and to fit in their commitments, be that family, be that work, be that kind of these extracurricular activities, and just weave that into their day and their day job, and to trust them to get on with it and to normalize that. So for me, on a practical level, if I've got a school governor meeting, I put that in that I've got a school governor meeting and it's in my diary, because the more that we make doing these elements normal, the more that more people will feel confident in doing that. And to take Louise's point as well, I think talking about it is really important. So I make it very clear to everybody at work that I'm a school governor, and I weave it into conversations which had value when we're talking around education. I share my experiences and say why I've got an experience within it, because I think that really helps people understand that opportunity is available to them too.
Thank you. Kim, anything you'd like to add there?
I think building on what Robert said, really my approach has always been that. So I've done exactly the same. If I've got to do learning, or I've got to do volunteering, or whatever it is, it's in my diary and I make no excuses for it. As far as I'm concerned, I do my more than my contracted hours, and therefore I feel no guilt. And that is applied the same with, bringing up 3 children. But what I find is, even though in the civil service, it's an entitlement in a sense, the 5 days, very few people take it up. And I think it comes back to what Melanie said earlier about, thinking, oh, well, I need to commit this time to my children, therefore I can't expect the organisation to give me any more time off. But I think it is up to, I think it's up to individuals to prove that these these opportunities are beneficial to the wider organisation, even if it's just in terms of developing your broader skills.
Thanks, Kim. And Michael has prompted me in the panelist chat to give some indication of the cost of the Charity Board Leadership Programme, which I will do. It's £875 per person, although we do offer 10% discount to HR professionals because we recognise the ambassadorial role you will all play in the future. And just to say, to give you a bit more information on it, it's cohort-based learning, normally groups of 20 people, where people who come on the training learn about trusteeship in its fullest sense. So the whistle-stop tour I gave this morning is this evening is an indicator of a starting point, but actually goes into much more depth about the nuances between being a strategic leader and being an operational leader, and also helping people understand how diverse decision-making really does affect the quality of the decision-making in the boardroom. Charities are not great when it comes to diversity in trusteeship. The average age of trustees is 57. The average gender, or the most overrepresented gender, as you will guess, is men. So if you fall outside of that category, then actually you are part of the people that make up the diversity bit. We also guide participants that come on the programme through the application process. We give them one-to-one expert support to find the vacancy and to go through the full process too. We help people conduct their due diligence, which is to a point I think it was Angela made in the previous panel. So we teach people how to do background research on your charity. So how to do things like use the Charity Commission register to find out and get your fingers under the skin of the charity as well. It's 12 hours of live interactive online workshops, one-to-one support for 6 months afterwards, and you receive a course pack which gives you everything that you need. So all the templates for your applications, the how-to guide, absolutely everything that somebody would need to kick off their trustee journey. Just to say too, I'm actually kicking off teaching one next week for Frontline. Frontline is a charity that helps get brilliant people into social work. And they recognise that their cohort of trainee social workers would make great trustees. So they have commissioned us to run a special cohort for them. So that is available to you too, and that is bespoke. So if you are interested, do get in touch with us. I'll drop my email in the chat room now. But enough of that. Thanks, Michael, for giving me the opportunity to flag that and for your support. But there's a question I just want to ask here, and just let me just entertain me for 30 seconds while I talk about young trustees, because that's obviously the element of the space that I come at this from. All the things that you've just spoken about, Louise, Robert and Kim, around ensuring that there's flexibility in the diary, ensuring that people take their volunteering leave, etc. Can you talk to us about how your organisation does that for younger professionals, often who aren't in control of their diary, are in quite junior roles, and usually need to seek permission to do these things? Can you talk to us a little bit about the culture there and how you navigate that? And I'll go to Robert first.
I think it's a really good question, and I think it really sits with the organisational culture. I think if you're a permission-based business, I think it's always going to be hard for people to make time at whichever level. So what we do is we have a very firm policy on flexible working, which is you work where you can, when you can, to deliver your job. And that makes things as easy as possible. I think it's about leadership. So being seen to be visible and active in these elements, which we do. We also make volunteering generally a really integral part of our overall engagement strategy. And we link it to things like our D&I and our well-being, because we realise that we have a mission, which is to make the world a better place to work. And we look to kind of enmesh our mission, our volunteering, our D&I, and have everything joined up. And because we have a very kind of young audience of employees, they get exposure to kind of all of these events, and we try and get everyone to take up their general volunteering and giving back kind of days. But often it's not the, often I think the challenge is the reverse, is how can we get people who are younger and at the start of their careers to see this as a longer term stepping stone in their career development, which is really hard, because if I'm being honest, when I was in my 20s, I thought about going to the pub, a restaurant, or the cinema much more than I did about going to a stuffy kind of room to be discussing trusteeships. And that lower the pub is really heavy compared to doing something which is 20, 30 years time where you're going to be reaping that. It's almost the same as pensions. Why do I want to save now when I've got all of the time to play catch up? So I think we need to make it maybe a little bit less big and scary, taking on the responsibility, and just an interesting and helpful part of general career development.
Thank you. And also, just to say, people always ask me what's the category of a young trustee. Well, if the average age is 57, if I were you, I'd go up to 56 years and 11 months, to be honest. So, Louise, anything to add there? And then I'm going to come to you for a closing thought before I hand back to Michael.
Yeah, sure. So I think for me at the moment at Bank of America, our focus is predominantly on the more senior population. Although under your definition of it, they actually quite a few of them will still class as young. I'm pleased to say. But I think where in my previous role at RBS, we did a similar sort of program, and we focused on sort of more junior talent. And I think actually I think the key to this is if you build it into a program where it is quite sort of clear, it's quite orchestrated, there's support behind it, that's probably a really effective way of doing it. And I think our next steps with Bank of America, once we've rolled out to the senior leader population, I think that I'm hoping that our next target population will be that some more junior managers, and these are our sort of leaders of the future. And I think this is a really healthy program to work with your future leaders to think about. It gives them some great skills, some really rounded skills, around strategy, around finance, and that sort of more rounded skill set. But I think it's a great one. And I say in my previous role at RBS, the feedback we got was amazing. People absolutely loved it. They got really enthused by the different charities that they worked for. So I would heavily recommend it.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So closing thought time. Kim, any closing thoughts?
Well, all I would say is that having become a trustee, all I do all the time is try and encourage young people to take it up as an opportunity now. And we can do that within our own families and our own friends, and we can sell it ourselves. So I would just say lead by example.
Thanks, Kim. Robert?
My simple call to arms is just get involved, give as much time as you can, start small, find something you like, and then just keep on growing and developing and changing, because I think that changing your trusteeships is important, because I think that will then be really valuable for you because you try and do lots of different things. Thank you.
And Louise?
Yeah, so for me, it's kind of what I was saying before. I think it's really it's understanding the value you can get from a program like this, put structure around it. And I think one of the things for me that was really useful is when we actually launched it with the senior leadership team, is to have somebody who already undertook the role of a trustee on a charity board to really bring to life the skills that you build from this, so that people see it as a really useful, creative, engaging way of developing talent.
That's great. Thank you very much. And that brings the two panels to a close. And this is the end of my role now. So I'm going to hand over to Michael. A big thank you to Kim, Louise and Robert. And I see that Mel, Jeremy and Angela are still on the call for giving their time this evening to talk to us about trusteeship and all the benefits that it has. And over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Leon. I should have said at the outset, Leon very kindly agreed to step in because Penny wasn't available due to COVID. And when he showed me the plan, I was somewhat horrified, indeed nervous, as how we were going to run two panels so tightly for time and get everyone to contribute. I'm sure I'm speaking for the whole of the audience this evening, but you did a fantastic job in hosting Leon, and unlike you, thank you for all your guests. I hope we've achieved two things tonight. One, as a participant of the session, that you're going away thinking, why don't I volunteer? And if you're in HR and L&D, I also hope you're thinking, why don't we use volunteering as part of our leadership development programs? If we've achieved those tasks, that will definitely make me happy. I'm very pleased with what you've done, Leon. And I think Getting On Board is an excellent, truly excellent organisation. Your wind up, I now need to do the advert for the next 2 sessions. Obviously, we're in a new year, so this was our very first session of the year. On the 28th of January, we're hosting a session called Changing Times Means Changing Minds. And Tom Cassidy from Working Voices will be presenting on that session. That's the 28th of January. And then on the 11th of February, the title is Surviving and Thriving in the Travel Industry. And we've got the HR director from Bristol Airport. And I'm hoping indeed that will be very well attended, because I'm sure we're all interested to know whether we can go on our holidays later this year. So thank you everybody for attending London HR Connection. I hope you found it valuable. And again, my thanks to Getting On Board for the presentation. Have a good evening and thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike.